Hi everyone and welcome to Creative Cakes by Sharon. Today I am doing the much anticipated third tutorial of my Disney Frozen videos, and of course it's none other than the lovable snowman Olaf. So today I've got a colour printout of Olaf. I'm just going to use him as a guide as I work along. I've got a board which I've covered in black fondant. I've also got my template spread across my 8x12 inch cake, and you can get the copy of this template from the description box below. We're using white, black, orange and brown fondant. I've got my cake smoother and offset spatula. I've also got a small round cutter which I'm going to use for the eyes. I've got my pizza cutter. I've got some black luster dust and a nice fluffy brush here today which we're going to use at the end to add some definition. I've got some little white sugar flakes. This is not necessary, but I'm just going to decorate the board with it later. I've also got some black sanding sugar, some water and a paintbrush, my buttercream frosting and a length of wire, as well as my fondant roller and a sharp knife. So let's get started. The first thing I've done is arranged all of my pieces of the template onto the cake. There is no rule about how you place them onto the cake so long as they all fit. The piece here is an extra piece which is the top of Olaf's lip, and we want that to stand out on the cake, so we're cutting that separately. So all I need to do now is go ahead and with my sharp knife cut around each piece of the template, making sure that the knife is vertical all of the time so that we don't get any slanted edges. If you've seen the Disney movie Frozen, you'll know, and I think you'll agree, that Olaf is just the most gorgeous little snowman. Though of course there are others like Anna and Elsa, and if you click on the links you can see on the screen now, you'll be able to see my tutorials on how to make cakes of both of those characters. To make the cavity for Olaf's mouth, I'm just going to cut the inside of his mouth out from the stencil and then place it back onto the cake, and with my sharp knife I'm just going to cut along the inside line of the mouth, probably about 1 centimetre deep, and then I'm going to make a few more cuts into the mouth cavity just so that when I scoop out the cake it'll come out in nice little small sections. So I'm just going to make like a grid, and then with my offset spatula I'm just going to scoop out all of that cake from inside the mouth. I'm going to now take the piece which we've created for Olaf's top lip and just cut it down the middle so it's not so tall, and then I'm just going to taper the sides of the lip just so that we get a rounded finish. Now it's time for me to cover all of the pieces with my buttercream frosting. So when you're doing this, make sure you get a nice even coat over the top and all around the sides. You will get quite a few crumbs in this coat because we have done a lot of cutting and carving of the cake, but that's exactly what a crumb coat is for, to catch all those crumbs and secure them nicely. And once I've finished with this, I'm going to pop it in the fridge for about 15 minutes. Once I remove the pieces of cake from the fridge, the buttercream has formed a nice crust, and I'm just going to now smooth the cake over with some boiling water and my offset spatula and a paper towel. So just heat up the offset spatula in the water, clean off any of the excess in the paper towel, and then smooth all the top and sides of the cake. At this stage I'm just going to make the buttons, the hands, the nose and the hair just so they've got a little bit of time to dry before I put them onto the cake. So I've got my template as a guide, and using some of the black fondant I'm just going to make 3 shapes for the buttons by just rolling 3 unevenly shaped balls. Now I'm just going to embellish the buttons a little bit using the black sanding sugar and some water and a paintbrush. I'm just going to dampen the buttons with some of the water and then sprinkle the sanding sugar over the buttons, and then I'm just going to tip off the excess and put them aside to dry. To make the 3 strands of Olaf's hair, I'm just going to take some black fondant and roll it into a long snake. Then I'm just going to divide it into 3 and grab my wire and cut that into 3 lengths, a little bit longer than the actual strands of hair. And then once I've inserted the wire into the fondant, I'm just going to make the tip a little bit pointy by rolling it around, and then I'm just going to create a little bit of a curve at the top. With the last piece I'm just going to slice through the fondant to create a split in the twig. To create the arms, we follow a similar process by rolling out some brown fondant this time and inserting the wire into the fondant. And then with my knife, I'm going to make 3 cuts into the fondant to create the fingers and the thumb. And then I'm just going to pinch along the length of the arm so that I can create a little bit more rustic and natural look to the twigs. Now I've got the orange fondant as well as a template for Olaf's head, so I'm going to create his carrot nose. So if I press the bottoms of my palms together, I can create the more pointy edge and then flatten it on the surface of my bench. And you can also use the template for Olaf's lip as a guide, and then using my knife I'm just going to score some lines along the length of the carrot to make it look a little bit more realistic. I'm just going to dust the carrot now with a bit of my black luster dust to make it look a little bit more natural and give a little bit more definition to Olaf. Now it's time to roll out my white fondant. I'm going to roll it out to about 2 or 3 mil thick, and I'll start by covering Olaf's face because it is the trickiest one of all of the pieces. So just gently lay the fondant over, and don't be afraid to lift up the sides of the fondant and let it fall into all of the creases. With your palms and your fingers, mould the fondant into the gaps. With the mouth, just gently press with your finger into the cavity, and then with your pizza cutter, trim off all of the excess fondant. Then smooth the entire cake with the cake smoother as well as your palms. And a little trick to get into the mouth cavity was to use my knuckle as it fit perfectly into the gap. Before I put Olaf's head away to cover the other pieces of cake with fondant, I'm just going to work on the eyes for a moment. So I've just cut the eyes out of the template, and I'm just scribing onto the cake with the back of my paintbrush where the eyes are actually positioned, and I want to make a little bit of a well with my paintbrush. So now I'm going to cover the other section of Olaf's body, so his upper chest, his tummy and both of his legs. Now with all of my body parts around the board, I'm just going to roughly position the pieces onto the board before I put them there permanently, just so that I can get an idea of what positioning I'd like it to be in. There's no hard and fast rule. A snowman can take on any shape, so position him however you like. All of the individual pieces of the body will match when they're placed next to each other. Be creative. I'm going to put mine on an angle so that he fits into my board, so that's a little trick if you want to minimize the size of the board you want to use. And after I've placed all of the pieces on the board, I'm going to just pop some water with a paintbrush onto his tummy so that I can attach his buttons. Now to create the eyes, I'm going to roll out a piece of white fondant, and I'm going to try and make it into a little bit of a mound. So using my template as a guide, I'm just going to pat down the fondant until it gets into a little bit of a dome shape and fits the size of the template. Then for the black pupils, we're just going to roll out some of the black fondant and use my round cutter to cut the pupil of the eye and fix that onto my white pieces of fondant. And then with 2 tiny little white balls of fondant, I'm just going to create the reflections for his eyes. Now an easy way to create his eyelids and the outline around his eyes, I'm just going to take the stencil for his eye and trace it around a rolled piece of black fondant. Now this is going to go straight onto the cake, and the other sections of the eye are going to go on top. So it's going to create a border. So when I position them into the cake, I want to press the black fondant down into that little well that we created. This will help the eyes blend into the cake, and it won't look as though we've just stuck his eyes onto his face. With a little bit of water, attach both of the eyes onto his face, and now grab Olaf's nose and position it onto the cake and press down a little bit over his eyes. Now remove the nose and just cut out gently with your knife the excess pieces of the eye which are covered by the carrot. This will help the nose to sit flush to the face, and just attach it with a little bit of water. Now using some brown fondant, I'm just going to roll out Olaf's eyebrows, and I'm going to use the template as a guide, and once I'm happy with the shape I've got, I'll attach it to the cake. To create Olaf's mouth, I'm just going to roll out some black fondant and use the piece that I cut out for his mouth earlier to cut around that, and then position it inside the cavity of his mouth. To make his teeth, just take a small piece of white fondant and pat it down into a rectangular shape with 2 angled edges and position it on the cake. I'm just now going to add a little bit of black luster dust around Olaf's body just to create some shadows and also a little bit of depth to the cake. This step is totally optional, you can keep it out if you wish. Now finally it's time to insert Olaf's twigs for his hair and also his arms. They will have had enough time to dry sufficiently and you can put them in any angle that you choose. And to finish off the cake, I've just added some of those white sugar snowflakes on my board. And there you have Olaf the snowman. Guys, if you enjoyed my tutorial, you can click on the links below to share and like my video. And don't forget to subscribe to my channel for more great video tutorials. And thanks for watching.